Our next session is going to be led by our own 2023 OHDSI Titan Award winner, Katy Sadowski, for open source development for her fantastic work as a maintainer on the data quality dashboard. And she's going to be leading a session, a dialogue with our developers on how they're using software development techniques and how those are now changing with the advents and the uses of tools like large language models, and how we can and how other developers can learn from some of our developers in the OHDSI community. Katy, are you ready?
I'm ready. Thanks so much for the intro, Paul. Like Paul said, my name is Katy Sadowski. I'm on the real-world evidence analytics team at Boehringer Ingelheim and quite involved in the OHDSI open source community, maintaining a couple of projects and collaborating with folks through the Chiron cohort. So I'm really excited to be hosting this panel today. We just heard from a bunch of people about what software is being built in the OHDSI community, and now we're going to talk a bit about how open source software gets developed in OHDSI. We have 4 panelists from all across the OHDSI ecosystem who are going to tell you a bit about the tools and the workflows that they use to develop software for observational research. Each of them is going to present for about 5 to 10 minutes, and then we're going to open it up for some Q&A. I do have some questions pre-prepared, but I also encourage folks in the audience to raise their hand or throw questions in the chat. And I believe we're going to start off with Martin Lavallee, if he's on.
Yep, I am here.
Great.
So let me just share a screen so I can get my slides up here. It's always the hardest part is sharing screen. All right.
Also, thank you, Martin. I think you're on vacation right now, so we really appreciate. I think you're the second person today who's been traveling. Shows the dedication of our developers in the community.
Well, yeah, anything for the OHDSI community. Well, I'm being serious. It's been very helpful for my career, so I'm always willing to contribute back. But yeah, so my name is Martin Lavallee. I'm a member of Boehringer Ingelheim's RW analytics team. I'm a colleague of Katy's. So I've gotten into OHDSI. I started my journey back in 2018 symposium, and have been doing projects ever since. So probably one that many of you have heard my name through is Caper. So that is a tool that I've worked on. It's in Hades. But the tool I'm going to present today is Ulysses, which is an RW study workflow tool that for in R. So something I'm very proud of is since I've moved over to Boehringer Ingelheim is that we've become closer and closer to being an OMOP shop, which I'm very happy about. We use OMOP data and OHDSI tools to deliver on real-world evidence to our asset teams, and it's been going very well. And one of the tools that we've been leveraging quite a bit for that is this Ulysses tool for developing RW studies. So the background here is the problem we face is that studies are an organization problem. So there's a lot of code, there's docs, there's spreadsheets, there's people you have to work with, and there's all these different factors that go into a study, and you got to keep it all organized in some way. And the other issue we have is like a lack of standards. So there's no consensus way of how we do studies, at least within Boehringer is like say one analyst will do a study in one fashion and develop their code in one way, another analyst will do it another way. And this brings up a huge problem and it undermines the integrity of our evidence because we can't reproduce things. I've been in situations in the past where I go into a meeting and said, oh, this person produced this number last year. And I don't know how they produced it, don't know where the code is. And even if I were to see it, I have no idea where to begin with. So that poses like quite a bit of a problem. And having some sort of standards would make it easier in order to like develop studies at scale. So the goals that we want to embed in our solution is we want to use Git. So something that's actually quite less common than you would think within the analytics space is version controlling of our code. It is version controlling of our code. So we want to incorporate that. We want to have flexibility. So we always want to be using OHDSI tools. We want to use tools like Strategist, like cohort method, but the requests from our stakeholders don't always align with that. So we have to be able to be flexible and accommodate to the stakeholder needs while maintaining a fluid process. We also want to have identifiability. So what is a unit that we can identify studies for tracking purposes in terms of workload, and then also in order to have knowledge transfers. So when, like, say, Katy goes on vacation, I can take over her project. I know exactly what the code looks like, and I can keep adding to that project over time. So this brings up Ulysses, which is our workflow tool for developing RWD studies through OMOP. So we have a standard repo structure, so that leverages Git. So everything looks the same. We have anticipation, so we always know where to find things as we're exchanging the projects. And then this tool also provides helpers for importing credentials and Atlas assets and templates, so that we have a knowledge center that we can import into our standard repo structure. And this allows for encouraging standard code styles, reusable code snippets, and then standard dissemination that we do through Quarto. So for the sake of time, I'll kind of stop there, but this is kind of what the repo structure looks like in terms of how, like, the standardized directory structure. And then these are some of the workflow tools that we have incorporated within the package. The last thing I'll say is that this package is still definitely a work in progress. And we're thinking of doing a refactoring of that going forward in time. So yeah, we'll look forward to some updates with that. So I'll pause there and pass it off to the next person.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Martin. And I definitely encourage anyone who is interested in that to check out the Ulysses repo in the Odyssey project. I'll throw the link for that in the chat once we switch speakers. And I'm actually looking up who the next one is because we changed the order last minute. It is Edward. Please come on to the stage.
Hello. Give me a second, I will open my presentation. Okay. Okay, so a little bit about me. I work as a software engineer for Odysseus EPAM now company, and I want to say that I will talk a lot about my experience with large language models and AI, and it may not necessarily be representative of what my company thinks of them, or even my colleagues. So who am I? I'm with OHDSI community from the very beginning of my professional life. I started working with the vocabulary team, working on vocabularies, standardizing, and row-level manual mapping. And over time, I basically learned to automate this process, and over time transitioned into being a full-time software and data engineer, basically automating work that I used to do by hand. So my mainly well-known projects that you may have heard of is Jackalope, which was my first attempt in automating semantic mappings in a very extensible way. You know that we have a process in place for drug vocabularies where we can standardize them basically in fully automated fashion, just because drugs are so well represented by their attributes. And I've tried to develop something something similar using SNOMED attribute value system for other domains. And Boehringer is basically an extension of that work, now using LLMs to automate the attribute mapping process, and in theory to get mappings in fully automated fashion per input data row. So I will talk a little bit about, I want to talk about LLMs, that tools that now using. So I'm maybe on a more skeptical side. I do believe that we are now seeing the extent of what is really possible with LLMs as a technology, and I believe that if we start treating them not as this new solution to all problems, but a technology that has its downsides as well as its upsides. We can really make them a much better part of our development experience and a better part of our products. So to really quickly show what Buzikis is in a better detail, basically I wanted to come up with a replacement for Usagi because there is no, because Usagi is, well, it's pretty good for simple concepts, but it uses just term frequency, inverse document frequency as its basis algorithm, and it's pretty limited and cannot make full use of context like LLM do. It's a very big presentation I originally made for a generative AI work group, but basically the idea of Buzikis is to use rigid SNOMED modeling to navigate SNOMED hierarchy, and only use LLMs for as a knowledge-based retrieval tool, so to reduce risk of hallucination impacting our standardization process. So that's it for brief introduction.
Wonderful. Thank you, Edward. And I will turn it over to Egill now.
Ick, we don't hear you.
Sorry, that
I
was
hope
my
you-
probably mispronunciation.
No.
No, it's fine. It's I'm used to it.
Thank you.
But thank you for having me so much. I hope you see my screen and my presentation now.
Yeah.
So my name is Egill Fridgeirsson. I'm a postdoc at the Erasmus MC in Rotterdam, and I'm the maintainer of patient level prediction along with GeneraPs, and the creator and maintainer of the deep PLP, both Hades packages. So I wanted just to introduce myself a bit, where I was before OHDSI and where I am today, and hopefully it can help someone who's maybe in the same position. But in the beginning, I had basically no R knowledge after my PhD. I was a Python guy. I had never solved a Git merge conflict, so I had never worked collaboratively with others on GitHub, and I had never contributed to open source software. Now, if I contrast that with me today, I would say I'm quite proficient in R and a bunch of other languages. I'm working with Git daily. I'm collaborating a lot on multiple repos with other people. I'm the maintainer of 2 Hades packages, and I'm contributed to multiple more. And yeah, I've changed my preferences for IDEs somewhat. So how did I get here? So I was lucky in the beginning that I'm in a position where I have to rely on OHDSI software for doing research. So it's specifically the patient level prediction package. Quickly after being hired, I was introduced to GeneraPs, which is a collaborator of our department and was the main maintainer of PLP at the time. And then I learned some basic R, and the first thing I did was I learned to use the debugger. And that way, because I'm using the code to run studies, so I need to understand what the code is doing. So I spent a lot of time in the beginning just stepping through literally all the Hades packages, almost all the ones that PLP relies on. And then I was asking critical questions about the code and how it works. And because Jenna is a nice person, I immediately felt comfortable starting pestering her on the GitHub issues. And because she's smart, she quickly offered me to do a pull request to solve one of these issues. And that's basically how I started contributing to PLP. And that over the time grew. And recently I took over as the main maintainer of PLP, but of course, Jenna, we are both maintaining it. So if I look in at the last 4 years of my journey contributing to the PLP, I want to highlight some DevOps things I've done. So one of the first things I did was I reduced the unit test time. It was, well, it took a lot of time. It took 30 minutes to run the unit test suite, and it would fail kind of randomly. So I reduced that to 90 seconds over time. And now the only reason it should fail is if it just introduced a bug. I've also worked quite a lot on the continuous integration pipeline. So for those who don't know, the Hades has kind of like a standard workflow that it runs, and test the packages before you merge your code in. But I've added a few extra things. Like now I test all like links in the documentation because users were complaining a lot because there were dead links in the documentation, and it's hard to keep the documentation up to date with the code when the code is always changing. So I fixed all that, and then I added this workflow so this would never happen again. I also recently, actually last week for the PLP, but a bit more since for the DPLP, I now publish Docker containers automatically with every tagged release on GitHub. The containers are built and they are tested, and only if they pass the test, then they are published. We also got into CRAN with the PLP, which is a huge thing actually for us because for accessibility of our packages, like our users usually install packages from CRAN. And in some secure environments, that's actually the only way you can install packages in R. And yeah, a bunch of other things. And I also want to mention like some of the unique challenges with both the patient level prediction and the deep patient level prediction. This is like a multilingual code base. So we are calling Python from R. So every time you need to cross that boundary, like when you're debugging or there's an error message that needs to go from Python to R, it's like quite a hassle actually to see it, especially in GitHub Actions. But since I was bragging about a container, I am now going to run a quick demo. We are going to develop a deep learning model. Hope you see my terminal, using the latest container from DPLP. So now the container is running. I cheated and I downloaded it beforehand. It has an RStudio server instance. So I can log into RStudio in the container. Then I have 40 lines exactly of code, which I will share in the chat later. Which I'm gonna see. It's better to use NeoVim. Oh, sorry. I'm gonna just run this snippet, and then I'm gonna explain what's happening. So I have a test database here with 1 million patients. It's in DocDB, and I mapped it into the container. I'm extracting data here from 2 cohorts I have built. So I'm predicting dementia in older patients. I'm extracting some features, age, gender, and condition occurrence in the last year. And then I'm training a deep learning model. It's the default ResNet from the DPLP package, which is like a multi-layer perceptron with residual connections. I'm predicting dementia in the next 5 years. I modify some of the parameters, and I am actually running this on the GPU on my laptop, so I hope it doesn't break my Teams. And as you can see here in the logs, this is training. And I can also swap over to the terminal, check the GPU. Well, it is running on the GPU, as you can see. And now it's training the final model on the whole training set, and it should soon make prediction on the test set and give our results back. So here is the results on our test set, 75% AUC. We just trained a deep learning model. It's a bit overconfident in its risk prediction. Its predicted risk is a bit higher than the observed rate. But with this, I conclude my demo, and I thank you for your attention, and I'm giving the mic back to Katy. Thank you.
Awesome. I think that was the most epic demo I've ever seen. You just trained a deep learning model in like 2 minutes and nothing went wrong. So congrats on that. Thank you very much. And I'll turn it over to our last speaker, Lawrence Adams.
Cool. Let me share my screen. I'm not bold enough to do a live demo, so I'll keep my talk short and sweet. That was very cool. So hello, I'm Lawrence. I'm going to talk briefly about DBT Cynthia, which you heard a little bit about earlier on. To begin, a bit about me. I'm an ex-doctor, mostly with an intensive care background, lifelong coder, software developer. Did medicine for all the wrong reasons. I now run a team based across various London trusts in South London mostly, focusing on omopifying the many years of data that the NHS has sat on and not done much with, as a policy focus on health data research, doing some other stuff such as using LLMs for structured data extraction, other stuff I'll show in a second. If any of you are ever in London and want to say hello and talk to me about health data, please come along and visit. We're just opposite Westminster at a place called the Lavallee. So what is DBT Cynthia? I think most of us know what Cynthia is. It's a tool to generate synthetic healthcare data. You can set it to go in various output formats such as FHIR or CSV, which we use. DBT is, I think we all know now as well, is a tool to help orchestrate SQL transformations for modeling and testing data. So why was I interested? I actually first came across it as I was frustrated with the previous iteration of the tool, something called ETL Cynthia. I couldn't get it to run, or it would run out of memory fairly frequently. And I disagreed with some of the transformations. You can see there's a synthetic data set on AWS S3, and I found that a lot of the referential integrity was broken. I was looking for something more, so I stumbled upon Katy's project, which was DBT Cynthia, and I got involved in developing it a bit further. You've all seen this. This is a part of the DAG, which is quite big, but seeing how the data flows, I think one of the nice things about DBT Cynthia as a project is it makes OMOP a lot more accessible. And talking about OMOP to people who aren't versed in it, it's kind of intangible and they don't know how people produce these data sets. And I think that's one quite nice thing about DBT Cynthia. I helped set up some of the workflows and CI and testing for the project. So in every PR run, we test, validate, and update all the documentation, which is part of the repo. So one of the other cool things I managed to do is extract all the documentation and tests from the OMOP 5.4 documentation and turn it into DBT tests automatically. So you can see that each field as part of the DBT docs is documented, and we've done the same with tests. So we validate build time with DBT that all the tests are valid. All the tables are valid and map the OMOP syntactic structure, and all references are valid. What I've learned, the Odyssey community has been very welcoming and been great to be a part of. A lot about OMOP modeling, which is part of my day job. Bugs in other projects. So this goes to Katy, but we found a bug in Cynthia when trying to stress test DBT Cynthia, that if you try and use it to create millions of patients, some of the IDs become non-unique, so your output data doesn't really make sense. I think one thing which, again, in my day job and in open source as a whole, is having automated testing and strong CI/CD foundations makes things a lot easier. People know how to contribute, and you make sure you're on the right track. One final thing to talk about, hopefully I might be able to showcase this in the future, but one of the projects that I'm part of is using OMOP to train in a federated fashion machine learning models for radiology data, for DICOM data. So we're using OMOP as a core backbone for federated databases, which are controlled in a central hub. And we're using DBT to do that. So kind of bringing it to a close as to how DBT is used in the real world. But thanks very much.
Wonderful. Thank you, Lawrence. So now I think we can turn it over to Q&A. If all the panelists want to come back on camera, that would be great. And if folks in the audience want to raise their hand or throw questions in the chat, please do. Vishnu, go ahead.
Hi, Katy. Lawrence, hi. I've seen all your work on the GitHub repo. Fantastic what you and Katy have done. Maybe you'll convince me to go back to using DBT now. So my question is, when you're using this across London, you heard me speak about the challenges that we faced using DBT, especially working as a team. Did you face any similar challenges, or what has your strategy been to kind of getting teams to collaborate on DBT?
Yeah, I think I've tried SQL Mesh. Is very nice. I think the team are already well trained with DBT, and we're most of the way with using DBT, so we decided to stick with it. The stuff like state, I do agree, could be handled with DBT a bit better, and I think that's changing in some of the new releases. There's if you're doing backfilling in incremental builds, have some micro batching incremental strategy you can use, which is a bit nicer. Setting up your CI well for incremental builds and managing your state makes life a lot easier. Otherwise, I agree, you're sitting around spending lots of money on compute or time on compute you don't need. I think it's whatever tool you find's best. Maybe I'll jump to SQL Mesh, but yeah, I think many ways to skin the cat. Choose your fit for it. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Paul.
Yeah, I'm wondering, does anyone have a rule of thumb, just the number of maximum lines to use or to allow to be used when generated by an LLM? I think I heard some comments earlier that I think 50 lines was from Paul was the limit. I'm wondering if you guys have something like that. It's just a rule of thumb.
I think Paul was referring to the size of a commit. Where does LLMs come in here, just to clarify the question?
Oh, apologies. Yeah, let's say we're vibe coding, right? So we have an LLM generate some code for us, and it looks great, and it can all fit in one file. But at what point do we want to start segmenting the file using, yes, it's all object oriented, but when do we really just want to split it up into various files? I know a lot of people make use of repos and definitions inside of repos. I think that is where I'm headed, as opposed to 100+ lines of code generated, strictly generated, not something that was collaborative, so to speak. Here's my code, edit. More just here's a prompt, some very long context. It spits out 150 lines of code. Is that too much, or is 300 lines of code appropriate?
Okay, I think I'm going to break this down into two parts, since we actually haven't talked about LLMs much at all. Edward mentioned it briefly in his presentation. So first, I'm going to have folks go around and say whether or not they are using LLMs in any capacity to develop software. And I guess let's go in presenting order. So Martin, you can go first.
Use of LLMs. I currently don't, but that is mostly due to a institutional limitation. It was only recently that GitHub Copilot was allowed, that we could have it with us. I think like in the future, at least how we do our studies, like we're building out a code base for a particular study, I do think that that sort of paradigm would be helpful with certain constraints, because we do have a lot of like common recipes that we want to use. Like we're generating cohorts the same way every time. We're calculating, say, like incidents using the same packages every time. So yeah, you could do something like that where you're doing a little bit of vibe coding, or like to at least prompt you. I don't have enough experience to say what is the line threshold, but I do think that it's a interesting idea, at least from our maturity standpoint. But in Boehringer, like we're not quite there yet, and we still have a lot to explore. But I think it's a good idea in principle, as long as you have very structured elements to like what you're trying to do.
Thanks, Martin. Edward, do you want to chime in?
Yeah, so I do use LLMs, at least for my open source work, where I'm not limited by institutional rules. Right now, interestingly, I do not use it because I recently switched to IDE, switched to a new IDE, and just couldn't be bothered to set it up. with Copilot just yet, but yeah. What I want to say is that a lot of modern languages with language setter protocols and debugger adapter protocols and other fun stuff that VS Code had brought for us. Not necessarily even users of VS Code, is just LSPs are now everywhere, and they provide a lot of features that were until recently only limited to very advanced IDEs. So something like generating signature of a function is when you inherit it is as a method in a new class. It's now can be done without even LLMs, and I do it without LLMs. But I'm not opposed to it, and I certainly use it not for like writing my code. I never really tried vibe coding, like where I would direct LLM to write the code in my place, but I do use it to generate boilerplate code. And then again, I notice that I generate way more boilerplate code than when I use LLMs. So sometimes I stop and rewrite it in a more concise fashion.
Great. Thank you. I have forgotten how to pronounce your name again. I'm so sorry.
That's fine. It's Egill.
Egill.
Yes.
Thank you. I didn't want to say it wrong again. I'm very sorry. Please
no problem.
let us know how you're using LLMs, if at all.
So I'm using, I use Copilot for auto-completion. And I find it useful, at least. Well, especially if you're writing like something really like repetitive, which sometimes you have to do. But I use also like the reasoning models, like starting with O1 from OpenAI. So we have like an APA access here at our institute. And I use it just to sort of, yeah, instead of Google, I might just ask the LLM instead. I might discuss like an idea I have for modifying the code in some way. So I just ask it like, okay, if I want to modify this code so I can add like more types of this thing in the code, how would I do that? And just see what it thinks, stuff like that. And I've found it actually, yeah, quite useful. I'm not vibe coding much, but one thing LLMs seem to be very good at is plotting. So in R, I'm using like ggplot2 sometimes. I need to make these diagrams. I had this lecture I was teaching, and I could just describe what I wanted in the plot, what kind of diagram it was, and then the LLM would just generate like 50 lines of code, and I could just run it, see the output, tell it adjust this or that, and do it again, and until I was happy.
I've had the same experience. Figuring out all those bajillions of parameters you could put into ggplot is definitely much easier using the LLMs. I have another question for you, actually. Are you using the autocompletes in RStudio, or are you using more VS Code?
I'm using it in RStudio and Vim.
What's your experience using that? Do you have some techniques you could suggest? I know that you can put like a comment of what you are trying to do, and then it'll auto-generate it. Any tips there?
I mean, I've sometimes tried that, like when I'm creating like unit tests where you're like testing like the edge cases of the parameters that are like an input to a function. I mean, then you just start writing the test and it kind of finishes, and then you can write a comment below, like add more tests for this thing or whatever. And it mostly works, but it's like simple, repetitive boilerplate code. So
yeah, that confirms what I've observed as well. If you have something above that you wrote and then tell it like do the same thing but slightly different, that's
I tried recently. There is this tool called Aider. It works on the terminal, and you can like give it, you can connect to whatever LLM you have access to through an API, and you can give it files as context, and you can say, okay, develop this feature. So I tried that in the DPLP, and it like messed it up. So yeah, so I'm not vibe coding in DPLP yet.
Not yet. Okay. Great, thank you. I'll let Lawrence give his LLM spiel, and then John, we can answer your question.
Sure. So I do use them. I think like everyone else has said, they work well for boilerplate code. For unit tests, they're pretty good. Documentation's good. I think if you're doing greenfield work, so integrating new features, it can be pretty good. But like we just said, even if you do provide lots of context on maybe questionable code, even good code, it can be led astray pretty easily. So yes, I think also in terms of the question about number of lines, it's quite context dependent. I think as soon as you're going over, 10, 20, 30 and splitting things out to multiple functions, it goes wrong. Every time I've done it, I've come back the next day and started again. But it's useful as like a pair program or something to bounce ideas off or learn from. But I think vibe coding all the way, it's not going to go very far, especially with this kind of work where how you handle data or passing things around is quite important and sensitive and maybe requires a lot of domain knowledge, which it won't really have.
Great, thank you. And I bet you all might have experienced this as well. The LLMs are aware of the OMAP CDM thanks to all of its online documentation. So writing actually some DBT docs for just the OMAP table structure, you start typing out a person table and it gives you all the table names, all the data types, all the column names. Pretty impressive.
Still makes mistakes.
Still makes mistakes, I agree. Sometimes it invents columns that aren't there. You've always got to double check. Okay, wonderful. Thank you all for those answers. I'm going to let John ask his question, and I see also Patrick has one in the chat, which I will ask after you go, John.
Not so much of a question. I tried to resist, but I can't help but put my 2 cents worth in here. As far as generating code for complex problems and generating lots of lines of code, I think it comes down to there's a lot of really bad code out there that's written by people. And this, I come from a Java background, and I'm a very strong object-oriented design kind of guy. And you come across Java classes that are thousands of lines of code long that were written by people. And then the other thing that you come across a lot in Java is, things like overuse of generics and creating really complex, obtuse, complicated code to show how smart you are. And my rule of thumb there, and so there's the two things. There's very large classes and very complicated classes. And for the very complicated classes, I would say, even working with humans, if you're that clever when you create it, how clever are you going to be a year from now when you have to go back and debug it or change it? And so I would say the same thing applies to using large language models to solve complex problems. Like if you ask a prompt something like, create a machine learning model to to predict the price of tea in China in a month, and it spits out, this whole application. I would say the rule of thumb would be if you don't understand that code and if you can't read through that code and know exactly what everything is doing, you probably shouldn't include it. You definitely should not include it in the production system. And again, to reiterate what the other speakers have said, it's really good for boilerplate stuff and for not memorizing stuff, like things like, how do I generate a GUID in Python? How do I generate a GUID in R? And it's like simple one, or even, how to create a plot, create a scatter plot from the output from this model, because a lot of the APIs are, have different outputs and different variables. And especially in Python, a lot of those variables are kind of hidden in those kind of quasi-private variables that Python API users love to use. So if you can't understand the code, you're being too clever by half. So that would be kind of my 2 cents worth on the topic.
Thanks for sharing, John. And I think this is another, no, please, that's great. I think it's another advantage that we're all working in public. You have nowhere to hide if you're committing a bunch of trash vibe code. So your community is here watching you and using your code, so be careful. I see we have a couple hands raised. I'm going to ask Patrick's question for now, because I think it's a great one, and then we'll get to Vishnu and Roger. Actually, Patrick, you want to come on and ask it yourself?
Oh, sure. Yeah, thank you, Katie. Appreciate everybody on the panel giving their perspectives, and do want to
sincerely thank you all for your contributions. I guess I'm selfishly thinking about how do we enable you all to continue to do great stuff or even do more, and how do we enable other developers in the broader community to be so inspired by your work that they want to do this. And so my self-serving question is to understand if you all have any thoughts about what, as an open science community, we can be doing to support your development work, whether that be removing barriers or creating environments that make it easier or more helpful to contribute. If you have any thoughts for things we could be taking action to continue to build out our development community, I'd love to hear them. Thank you.
So I think like when I think of what as a developer I would want, like what would make it easiest for me to contribute to OHDSI community, what I would want the best is basically a shopping list. Like what is actually needed right now? What do we want implemented? Where are we weak right now? Because there are things that are interesting to me, but they are not necessarily something that community would benefit from. I'm now working on a tool that vocabulary team actually does need for drug standardization process, because the current process that vocabulary team has, it's been designed a long time ago by people who were really good at the domain, but not necessarily good programmers, and a good tool to implement this process is lacking. So, but I know it's only because I used to work on this process. I used the old tool, like the 6,000 line long SQL script without much documentation, and now I'm rewriting it because like I know that it needs to be rewritten. So a kind of technical like task statement that any developer could pick up and contribute to would be really useful both for us and for community to benefit.
Yeah, Edward's comments are really important. Just having good projects to work on, or like things that matter, is good. I remember when I started out, my biggest problem was data. Like part of having good questions is having access to data to answer those questions. So a lot of the early stuff that I did was on synthetic data, which is fine in terms of like you have a representation of the CDM, so you understand like what's the backbone and you can understand the mechanics, but then actually seeing something work and visualizing natural phenomena like through a study, I think is really powerful in terms of like identifying what are the tools then needed to perform that experiment, or like do something at scale, or help you do like improve upon like what's currently out there. So I would say like, I mean, the answer to me is like more like mentorship opportunities. I know there's the Chiron cohort that's been around, but other types of opportunities where someone is, or people trying to get in are shadowing or developing with someone on the side, someone with experience, working on a project. I know those things are out there, but I think I know what we've done at my company is like really have people like learn the code base and kind of tinker with it and take it apart, put it back together. And that type of stuff is hard without having access to data and like financial support to do that at the right level. So I know it's kind of not the best answer, I would say, but I think, yeah, just having more opportunities and access to data would be very helpful.
My 2 cents. So I know at least like something that could turn people away is like if someone reaches out in an issue somewhere or in a forum post and no one answers, I think we as a community could do better sometimes in making sure that doesn't happen. But I also understand like many of the packages that we have, like there's a shortage of maintainers, there's a shortage of contributors, and having to like answer issues all the time is time consuming, and if it's not part of your day job, that's even more harder to justify. Like you're not gonna like spend your like evenings or weekends on that, I hope. Like but some, yeah, so maybe that's like supporting people better, and like let's not leave a man behind if he has a question.
I don't think I have much more to add. Getting access to data, even when you're in healthcare institutions, is hard enough. So imagine from a pharma side or an external side, it's even harder. And then you don't know if the data's been deep fried or things have been broken or if things don't make sense anymore. Some of the big packages that we wanted to use on my team, like White Rabbit or Usagi for mapping, again, to talk about that last point where things have maybe become stale or abandonware territory, Usagi hasn't properly, or several of them haven't really been updated for various years now. Maybe that's because they're perfect and, you know, it's a done project and they don't need to be touched again, but I think it's unlikely. But they're quite large code bases, and maybe there's been some loss of sort of institutional knowledge with those. I don't know how to fix that, but yeah. Not an LLM rewrite anyway.
I think there was a mention of that in the chat. I have one more question on the same topic, and then I'll go to Vishnu and Roger. So all of you are open source contributors, some maybe during the day, some maybe on the nights and weekends. But in terms of the time you do spend, you know, during your job contributing to open source packages, can you maybe give some tips to folks for how you get the support of your employer to spend that time working on open source contributions as part of your job?
Basically, the most recent example is to explain to people that we either make this change to a package we use and forever maintain it ourselves, or better yet, like the employer will have to maintain it after we leave, or we contribute it upstream and let other people benefit from it, but other people will also maintain it for us. So it's like the big promise of open source. So you do your part and everybody gets to benefit, like non-zero sum game. And yeah, basically this. Otherwise, it depends on your relationship with your employer. For some ideas, for some projects, it really makes much more sense to develop it and make it open, specifically for the intent to contribute it, for other people to contribute to your work. Or if you want your work to become standard, industry standard, in OMOP, it's much easier to be standard if you are open, like case in point, Atlas. Yeah, there are some products that replace Atlas, but like if they are not open source, like they are fighting an uphill battle because everybody is using Atlas. Well, how do we know that it's better, or when it is worse, or what's the difference? So compatibility with open source ecosystem is also another big point.
To piggyback what Eduard is saying, I think you bring up a great point about showing the value of the open source tools. Like, I mean, being on the pharma side, I can't tell you how many calls I've been on where someone is showing another version of paid Atlas with slightly different variation to the core functionality. And what it comes down to in terms of like supporting open source is that, like, from my perspective, like the ability to be transparent and be able to have like your institutional knowledge or your knowledge as a team to be able to support all the things that you do for like your department or within your company or institution, like that. It's a whole lot easier to do that through open source, because like really it's the knowledge from multiple people that drives like success, in my opinion, as opposed to just like buying something off the shelf time and time again. At least that's how I faced it in the pharma industry. But like getting people on board for open source, I think, yeah, it comes down to just showing its value, showing like like the OHDSI project is great because there's all these open source tools. Like you can just putting something together and showing someone a dashboard and saying this is the value that could be provided from doing this with open source tools, as opposed to if we were to hire another group or like buy this black box that no one understands and then you have to support in the future. I think could be a way that you could convince people to invest more in open source and invest more in the institutional knowledge that you're generating by using these open source tools.
Any other thoughts?
Yeah, so I'm maybe have a different perspective, but I agree with Lavallee about showcasing the value. So I'm an academic, so I need to write papers. That's like, and get grant funding and stuff like that. And in a similar vein, I think demonstrating the value of the open source tools we have to conduct studies easily and like conduct studies that no one else can do, I think it's very valuable for scientists, for example. But I've also like been in a lucky position that like my boss Peter Reinbeck like was one of like the maintainers PLP, and he's like pushing his department to contribute, and this is like something we use in our day jobs, sometimes in the evenings too.
I have nothing else to add. Everyone summed up very well.
Great, thank you. Vishnu, let's go to your question.
I think it was more a comment, Katy, both around the use of LLMs and maybe links into Patrick's call for how do we support more open source developers. I mean, I use LLMs all the time, probably because I'm not that great at coder, so I haven't quite figured out how bad they are. But things like documentation, right? LLMs are fantastic at documenting. You write a class. I do most of my work in Python, and I do quite a bit of work with Kubernetes. But let's say you write a Python class, you documented it, and you go and add a new class method, and you've added a new parameter, you forget to document it. But the LLMs will go, tap, it's done for you. So that's like a huge time saver. The question around, how many lines of code is too long? In VS Code, there's agent mode. I'm not sure if people have used VS Code in agent mode. That essentially will look at your entire code base and will split your code into multiple files automatically. That's another area that, if you have access to Copilot, try Claude Sonnet, and agent mode is fantastic. The third area is troubleshooting bugs. You get fed up of reading the entire error stack of a Python error message, or if you read Kubernetes logs, for instance. I've woken up and dreaming of scrolling through Kubernetes logs. LLMs don't get tired of that. You just paste the entire log into it, and it'll say, and especially if you're using VS Code in agent mode, it'll look at your code base, it'll look at your logs, and it'll go, these 3 YAML manifests don't quite make sense. You need to do this particular way. Finally, in relation to Patrick's question about LLMs are here to stay, right? GenAI is here to stay. We have a large number of tools within OHDSI that have evolved over the last decade. How can we best use LLMs to make it easier for new contributors, right? mean, we, for instance, in Langs and in collaboration with some of the people that Lawrence works with at King's, Richard Dobson team, we're working on an MCP server for OMOP, right? Maybe I'll bring it to the tab, but there'll be other things that we can do, right? There's A2A, there are MCP servers, there's a whole range of tools that's already available, human written tools that you can potentially expose to some of the novel. Lawrence, I can see the wheels turning in Lawrence's head, right? So there's a whole range of stuff that we can do. It'd be nice, within as a community, we kind of come together and have maybe a strategy or some pointers to say, hey, or even a working group, if there is one, a Gen AI working group for Odyssey.
I think there is one, though I don't know if it's been very well publicized. I think it's a great idea, and thanks for sharing all of those tips, Vishnu. I was taking lots of notes. If anyone knows the link to or the name of that Gen AI work group, please throw it in the chat. Though I would say I think the focus, based on my light perusal of some of their posts, had been more on using it for research use cases versus development workflows. The latter is something I think we could be talking quite a bit more about in the community.